Hi everyone, welcome back to Tallulah Talks, that is me. Please try to ignore the sounds in the background. As I said previously, I do own a bird, he is very chatty, and I have nowhere else to go in regards to filming. Today I am going to talk about the suicide forest within Japan, or otherwise known as Aokigahara. I've probably butchered that. Excuse me. I actually heard about this forest. Me and my boyfriend had decided to watch a movie. It was called The Forest, and it was about these twin sisters. One of the twins had gone into the forest, and it is believed because no one could reach her that she's probably gone there to commit suicide. In the end, the other twin sister actually commits suicide, and the original twin gets out. It's a really good movie. It stars Natalie Dormer. It's really good. I recommend you check it out. So basically, the suicide forest is pretty much, what's on the tin. People go there to commit suicide, and it is believed that their spirits haunt the forest. The forest is also said to be really dark because of the amount of trees, so it lets in hardly any sunlight. And it is also recommended by locals and tour guides that you don't wander around the forest after dark just because of strange things happening. It's also said that in the forest you can actually still see children's shoes that have been put there, people's belongings that have obviously been there while the people have tried to commit suicide. So let's just get on with it. So Aokigahara is actually a word that literally means sea of trees, which is what the forest is, but like I said, it lets in hardly any sunlight. The forest is on the northwestern flank of Mount Fuji, in an island in Hanshin, Japan. It has a reputation of being home to ghosts and spirits of the people who have killed themselves. And since the 1960s, it has been associated with suicide, but I believe it happened before then. Hikers from all over the world come as a type of challenge in the forest. I'm not sure, maybe to challenge themselves in that they won't take their own lives. I'm not entirely sure. And children actually will often visit on school trips. Again, why? It has another sort of skill to its beauty. The trees have grown so close together that the forest is always in semi-darkness, hardly any sunlight to get through because of how tall and how vast the trees are. Many who come to visit the forest have noted an eerie silence, you can't hear a thing. No birds, no other type of animals which you would usually hear in a forest, and that's why they've said it's eerily quiet. The forest floor is actually also made of volcanic rock. I think Mount Fuji had erupted, and so when the lava flowed, that's just always stayed there, I guess. It is thought that 100 or more people have taken their lives in the forest every single year. And I actually did a YouTube short where Japan has this ritual of suicides. I'm not entirely sure why. It's horrible. But this is where they will come to do this. It has been the site of many deaths since the 19th century, and it is a practice known as obasute. Again, I am so sorry I'm butchering these words because, yeah. The practice actually means, the word that I just said, means that elderly women would be abandoned and left to die in this forest in times of drought or famine. And if you were poor, the oldest in your family, because they were thought, they're going to die first, they would be abandoned in this forest. There was also a 1916 novel by a Japanese novelist. I'm not going to try and pronounce their name because, yeah. And it was a Japanese novel, and it meant the Black Sea of Trees. And it tells the story of this heartbroken lover going into the forest to end her life. which I mean it's probably quite common. Whether this is based on like a real story or the person just made it up, don't know. And the forest is said to be notoriously devoid of sound, as I've said earlier. And the more time you spend in the forest, the more you kind of get used to this deafening silence, and any noise, you're probably just like, oh, that wasn't there before. There are popular myths that state that due to heavy deposits of magnetic iron, and this is just one of the theories, that compasses are useless. So there have been stories of hikers going into the forest. They have their compasses, and when they get so far into the forest, their compass just stops working, and the thing on the compass just spins out of control. It is said that this is due to the magnetic iron, but it could be something else. This in turn makes it difficult to navigate in the forest, which is why I'm pretty sure there are guides there who probably know the forest pretty well. It is a very common belief in Japan that the forest is haunted by spirits called the Yuri, or those who have died within the forest. So obviously they've got to take their lives, but their spirits are maybe, I think they believe they're condemned, and so they haunt the forest. It is recommended by locals to either leave the forest by nightfall or just camp out. So now moving on to the curse of Aokigahara. During a Vice documentary, a curse is said to be on the land just with the amount of people who have died there. There's a Jack Skellington-like doll with his face cut off and nailed upside down on a tree, kind of given the shape of an inverted cross. According to one of the guides, Azusa Hayano, the Jack Skellington is nailed upside down to show contempt for society and just to show that the curse is nailed into the forest. It is known to easily get lost in this forest because, like I said, compasses don't work. In terms of nowadays with phones, I'm not entirely sure because I didn't find that in my research, but I don't know if the phones, you just don't get phone signal and then it's then impossible to kind of find your way out. People entering the forest will also actually string tape behind them so that it's easy to find their way back. However, there are stories of people having these strings cut, maybe on purpose, and they cannot find their way back. It's been known to hear mysterious screams in this forest. People have heard what sounds like blood-curdling screams while in the forest. So remember, this forest is eerily quiet, and to just suddenly hear this blood-curdling scream, that must be horrifying. A writer for the Japan Times told of his experience hearing the terrifying scream. So he stated that as he went looking for the source of this scream that he had heard, he actually came across a dead body of a man at the base of a tree. The corpse had been dead for some time, so that couldn't have possibly been the source of the scream, but it does make you wonder whether it is actually haunted or not. Another hallmark of the forest is that there have supposedly been ghost sightings, and they're all like the same sighting. They all see the same thing. Visitors claim to see white figures drifting between the trees, and Sci-Fi investigated with a show called Destination Truth, and they actually caught this spirit on camera. But again, I don't have any photos of this, which that would have been cool to put in this video, but I didn't find any photos relating to this. Many entering the forest with the intention of dying sometimes actually are able to leave the forest. It's maybe they've seen something and they don't actually want to die, and so they leave. Japan Times interviewed Hideo Watanabe. He owned a shop next to the forest, and he said that he had seen many exit the forest after attempting suicide, and he had even called an ambulance for one of these people. Since it is so close to Mount Fuji, the forest is considered a very spiritual place. The Buddhist monks have set up altars within the forest to try and combat evil spirits which may have come from the people who have committed suicide. One monk, Kayamyo, I can't say his second name, visited to set up the old altar, and he believed that the spirits were calling people there to kill themselves. So it's almost like if you were even thinking of suicide and if you were nearby, it's like the forest was almost calling to you to come and do the deed. There are a few stories from a couple of hikers as well. So one hiker, Kyo Tanaka, states that he went hiking in the forest by himself. He was quite used to hiking. He was a very experienced hiker. Once he found a good camping spot, he set up camp for the night. And he said at around 2 a.m. he was awakened by a very high-pitched scream. He looked outside, but he saw that there was nothing there. So he kind of thought nothing of it, went back to sleep. The next day, the man continued his hike. He thought he knew his way out, but after looking at his compass, the arrow just continued to spin, so he had no idea where he was in the forest, and therefore he had no idea how to get out. At this point, he did become disoriented, and he continued to walk, but when it became dark, he decided to set up camp again, because it is advised that you don't travel if you're still in the forest, you don't travel around in the dark. Again, at around 2 a.m, he heard another high-pitched scream. He grabbed his torch and lit up the area around his camp. He states that the torchlight caught a figure in white, and he tried calling out, but it was like his voice got stuck in his throat. He turned the torch off and headed back to his tent, and the next day he was still lost. He did continue hiking, and he managed to come across a skull and a pile of bones, which must have been terrifying. At this point, he basically ran, and it was just lucky that he found a lodge there, and he called the police, and I'm guessing they removed the bones. But knowing that this is a forest where people commit suicide, I mean, it's not unrealistic to think you're going to run across bodies, because you probably are. Another hiker who entered the forest, Yumi Mchara, he went to take his wife for an anniversary. I guess they were just very interested in the forest, so they took the trip to Aokigahara. They were hiking for a while. They were pretty deep into the forest, and he described it as very dark. He couldn't really see the sun, and eerily quiet. He and his wife passed by what looked like someone's camp. He didn't see anyone, but they saw that there was a tent that had been reinforced to kind of stop bad weather, and it was filled with pots and pans. There was laundry hanging up on some pieces of string. So someone had definitely been there for a little bit. At this point, he did see an old man come around the back of the tent. He did say hello, but it was like the man just didn't see him, and he didn't acknowledge the guy's presence. The couple eventually set up camp because it was getting dark. However, they couldn't sleep because of just how eerily quiet it was. Like, usually in places of nature and the forest, you will hear leaves rustling, you'll hear animals, you'll hear twigs snapping, that's just kind of natural. But for none of that to be heard, I can imagine how scary that must be. The next morning, they decided to go home, and as they were packing, they came across a pile of bones that were right next to their tent, and they hadn't seen them the day before. They tried to get out, but again, their compass wasn't working. They walked in circles, eventually circling back to where they believed the old man's camp was, but everything was gone, and they didn't actually make it out of the forest until the very next morning. And I'm sure there's probably more stories to go along with the suicide forest in Japan. It is a very popular place for locals and tourists to visit. I don't think I would like to visit, if you get lost and there's no one really there to help you. What do you guys think? Would you ever visit the suicide forest in Japan? It is very beautiful. I've seen pictures. I just personally wouldn't go there. But if this is the type of content you like and you have any stories for me about hauntings or anything like that, put them in the comments below. And make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I will be back on Wednesday for Killer Wednesday.